Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about a little bit more of Canada. There are only 3 sections in this chapter. We're going to do section 2. There are only 25 slides, so it shouldn't take too long. This is about the culture and the economy of Canada. So let's take a little bit of a look at this. Okay, so as you know from the last section I was talking about it, the French were the first Europeans to come and settle in Canada. Samuel de la Champlain and before him Jacques Cartier came down the St. Lawrence River. They made contact with the native inhabitants, and then French people started to come over. And what they did is they intermarried with the First Nations, and they traded with them as well. And what they were looking for were beaver pellets, or pelts, excuse me, not the pellets, because they wanted the skins, because it was very popular in Europe. They were making hats with them. These people were known as the voyageurs. So they moved westward, and as I said, they just kind of went out there and they intermixed with the native tribes as they moved west. So here's an image of some of these voyageurs who made their way westward. Okay, so today what you see though, different industry, we have farming, logging, and mining are very important. Farming, the book says only 5% of the land is suitable for farming. The video that you're going to watch says it's 8%. Needless to say, there's only a small percentage that's arable because so much of the land is either mountainous or it's very extreme, or in that it's very cold, or it's really rocky. Right, so 5% of the land is suitable for farming, and most of that is in the prairie provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. So if you go up to British Columbia, you're going to get a lot of logging and lumber and fishing in that area, much like our Pacific Northwest. Also in that area, you're going to find that mining is very important as well. Gold, uranium, zinc, silver can be found in those regions. Okay, fishing, you can see right here, Canada is, fishing is very important. A lot of the fish comes from the Atlantic provinces, which are also known as the Maritime provinces, because right there off the coast of Canada is what's known as the Grand Banks. This is some of the best fishing in the world, and through treaty, we share this area with Canada to fish in that region. So here you see some fishermen right there fishing off the Atlantic coast. The problem with this area is that it's been overfished, and so now what Canada is doing and the United States is doing is going to fish farms where you kind of raise the fish on your own, and then you get it that way. Okay, so what's happened with Canada is very similar to what has happened with the United States. Initially, they were farming, and then they went to manufacturing, and now the service industry is very important for them. And you can see that on this chart here from 1951 to 2006. The service industry makes up about 75% of all industry in Canada, and that's very similar to the United States. As a matter of fact, a lot of things are similar to the United States. Okay, so if you look where the manufacturing sectors are, they're right along that region there of the St. Lawrence River, which is very close to the United States, right in through here. And most of the people in Canada and most of the cities are within 200 miles of our border, and that's because it's warmer there. You can also see over in the western part of the country near Vancouver, you've got manufacturing there too. And then it's in other areas, Regina, Calgary, Winnipeg, other areas throughout and kind of in the central part. But for the most part, it's over along the St. Lawrence River. That only accounts for 1/8 of their gross domestic product. So there is some automobile, steel, appliances, electronics, and that sort of thing. Okay, so as I said, services make up more than 70%. Here it says 70%. That's finances, utility, transportation, tourism. Much of this finance, banking, commerce, much of that takes place in their largest city, which is Toronto, which you're going to see when you watch the video. Okay, if you look at trade, Canada's biggest trading partner is the United States. So we are very important for them. Most of everything that they produce comes here to the United States. So it's very important that we buy from them. But it's been really important for Canada throughout, even when they were a European colony, because a lot of the fur and the lumber and everything was being shipped to England. So it was basically an extractive economy where they're extracting natural resources that went elsewhere. Even today, they've got oil, they've got lumber, and those things go out to different parts of the world. We had a trade agreement with them known as the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was signed by President Clinton in 1994, which set up a huge trading bloc between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. When it wasn't really very fair. It was more fair to the other countries, and what happened is a lot of manufacturing left the United States. Many of those plants went just south of the border in Mexico. They're known as maquiladoras. So they were right there on the border. And so it wasn't really favorable for the United States. So in 2020, just recently, the Trump administration, it might have been in 1919, maybe it was in January, I'm not exactly sure, but they signed the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, which altered it somewhat. In your book, though, it talks about how important the trade is between the two countries. 78% of everything Canada produces comes here to the United States. So we are a very important trading partner for them, but they are for us as well. 52% of everything that they import comes from the United States. It's not 52% of everything we produce. It's just 52% of everything that they import. You know, they're not that big of a trading partner for us because they're so small. Canada's population is about the same size as California, right? So it's not that significant. They don't import that much, even though 52% of everything they get comes from us. Okay, so they pride themselves on being a very multicultural country. So as you know, we have the indigenous population, which were the First Nations and the Inuit, but there's also the Métis. I'm not sure, those of you that speak French, you may know, but this is a mixture between the French culture and those people that were Native American. So altogether, those are the indigenous populations, and they a lot of them live just like all other Canadians in the cities and rural areas, and then others live on reserves. But so you've got that population, and then you have the French, and then you have the English came in. In recent years, you're getting more people who come from Asia, especially maybe Latin America too, but mostly from Asia. Okay, so the languages, English is the dominant language in Canada, and you could see this right here. Some people speak both English and French, or English and another language. French, though, is also spoken mostly just in Quebec, right, there. Because when the English came over too, they brought other customs, and they are Protestant. The French, though, they were Catholic, and when they came, they prophesized their religion. They were trying to convert the indigenous people to that. Because there was this difference there, the French feel as if their culture was threatened, and so they've been trying to protect it. Some even would like to separate from Canada. Okay, so if you look, here is some disunity. This is another chart. These differ, and a lot of them are based on when they came out. So here it says that 40% of the people have British ancestry and 27% have French. I think, though, in a video that you're going to watch, it said 44% were British, yeah, and 25% French. You also have Native Americans and Asians, but the Asian population is growing. I think in a video that you're going to watch, it said that like 1/10 of all people living in Toronto were Chinese, right? So that really shows that that population is changing. This right here too, it shows that the population diversity varies from place to place. I want you to look at these cities that are in the province of Quebec, right here, Montreal, right? You got a large French population, as you do here in Quebec, right? And then you've got people who just say, I'm Canadian, right? But in other places where it's British, right here, like in Halifax, whoops, you know, if you look at the Atlantic provinces, those predominantly are of British origin, right? But the light blue shows the British, and so that is kind of the dominant heritage in many parts of Canada. All right, so because you have those two main cultures, historically there's been a lot of conflict between them. I think that it was in like 1998. The people of Quebec actually voted to withdraw from Canada and form their own country, and it was very close. They almost passed that, so there would have been another country up there. But anyway, 70,000 French remained in Canada when the British took over after the French and Indian War in 1763, right? And as I said, they only consist of about a quarter of the population today. What the government has done to appease the conflict there is they've written laws to where they want to protect the French language, and so they have two official languages in Canada, English and French. We have no official language here in the United States, but most countries do, and so they have two. All right, so you can see here too this chart that shows kind of what it was like with Upper Canada and Lower Canada, so where the St. Lawrence River is. Um, but you had those people that were living south of the river right here who spoke French, and then the rest who spoke English. So it just varied as they expanded. Now it doesn't make as much of a difference, but I do know when I was in Canada and driving from Ontario or in the province of Ontario, everything was in English and then it was in French. And then you get into Quebec, the province of Quebec, and everything was in French and then it was in English. And they became very offended with me if I tried to speak to them in English. So if you go there, you might want to try to speak to them in French. All right, so there have been some moves towards secession, and that is spelled incorrect up there, so I'm gonna have to change that. But anyway, the French-speaking people have wanted to shift to where they have gotten their independence. These people are known as the Quebecois or the Francophones. So they have worked to try to secede since the 1960s. I don't know, to be honest with you, if that's still a movement that is popular in France or in Canada today or not. Okay, one thing, as I said, they really do embrace diversity. You have 27,000 Inuit, which is very small, actually, population. There are about 360,000 people who live on the reserves. And the video said 360,000. I think the book said 370,000. A lot of people also live in other places throughout Canada. They're getting a large number of people coming from Asia, as I said before. So very, very diverse. And they really welcome that diversity. Some things that have helped to bring them together is their communication and transportation links with the Transcontinental Railroad. Now with modern communication, it's a lot easier than what it once was. Okay, so if you look at the settlement patterns, where they settled first was along waterways, and that's very similar to the United States. And so the most densely populated parts of Canada are right there along the St. Lawrence River, the Great Lakes, and then also over on the western border along the Pacific coast, right? So Vancouver and Victoria over there. 80% of the population live on 10% of the land, and most of that is within 100 miles of our border. Okay, and you can see where the population density is right there along the St. Lawrence Seaway, down there where you've got Ottawa and Toronto and Montreal and Quebec, and then over here where you've got Vancouver and also Victoria, and then here you've got Calgary and Regina. So those are some of the larger areas. All right. 1/3 of the Canadians do live in urban areas, just like throughout the world, really. There's this growth of urban population. So 1/3 of them live in urban areas beginning in the 20th century, but 4/5 of them by 2008. So that's kind of like in the United States, we have what, 80% of our population lives in urban areas. Okay, the reserves, there are about 2,300 reserves in Canada for the First Nations, and this is land that's set aside. We call them reservations, they call them reserves. And here is a map of those. It's kind of like here in the United States too. There aren't very many reservations on the East Coast, but there are a lot more as you go to the west, the western part of the country. And that's because when people first settled here, they didn't really give that much consideration to the indigenous population, but as time went on, they wanted to embrace and protect them. And so as Europeans move westward, you're going to see that they kind of work with them um, to help them a little bit more than, and they're much more considerate the laws from what they once were. Okay, so if you look at the workforce, it's pretty evenly split between men and women working. Most people, as I said, work in service industry. A lot of the people there are very well educated. The oldest university is Laval. It is in Quebec. They have a 99% literacy rate. As you're going to see, though, from the video, there is some disparity between Indigenous populations and the rest of the population. They are less educated, they have more poverty, they have a lot more problems than other people in the country. Okay, sports and recreation, very important. One of the things that the book doesn't say is that basketball was actually invented in Canada, but they loved their hockey, right? And winter sports, skiing, skating, that sort of thing. Lacrosse was very popular up there. This was a sport that was invented by the indigenous population there. So they really love that. Some of their professional sports, they compete with the United States, right? Basketball, baseball. I don't think they have a football team. They have a lot of different events, right? They've got Winter Carnival. They've got the Calgary Stampede. Actually, that winter carnival is called Snowfest, right, in Quebec, and that celebrates their French heritage. Right, the arts are very important too. Indigenous population is embraced. They've got totem poles there, and like here in the United States, you know, some of that historic quality to them that we value. But they also have the European heritage and customs and traditions of England and France, and then modern art as well.